like to speak today about your work with the United Nations Refugee Agency. You have been with the agency and within the UN system for over 20 years, and I'm sure you have seen a lot come through in terms of innovation, new technologies, how you are adapting to the new technologies in order to create the programs you create. You were also for a while in Torino, in Italy. Tell us a little bit what's up right now. What has been the latest developments in terms of training programs and leadership development for the UN system and the UN Refugee Agency in particular?
It's a big question. Clearly, I think the biggest thing at the moment, which is caused by the COVID crisis, has been to look at the portfolio of leadership development programs that we have, and look at which are the ones that are critical, and which are the ones that are critical do we need to take from a face-to-face to a virtual or an online format. So the last 3 months have really been focused on identifying absolutely critical face-to-face learning, and then looking at how then do we take that online. And I think the process of prioritization is always good, and I think the process of looking at ways of taking what was an impossible thought 3 months ago to do leadership learning online, I think is interesting and poses many different and challenging questions. But I think it's possible. We are actually now launching, or have just launched in UNHCR, our sort of flagship strategic leadership program for P5s and D1s in an online version. So we have the first 16 colleagues going through July, August, September, October. So I really look forward to the feedback and a sense of what is actually important in that area. I think that's the one big piece in the last 3 months. If I look a little bit longer in terms of the time horizon, 6 months, I think the big things that we've done is really we've gone full scale into coaching. So we are now offering, UNHCR is now offering coaching for all P5s, for all D1s. Also, our executive level leadership have been offered coaching. Every P5 D1 colleague have access to 6 hours of coaching initially. If they want more, they get more. We are piloting coaching for national staff as well. So a lot is happening, which takes leadership development from a traditional classroom-based setting into much more of a virtual space and an individual space. So, it's about helping colleagues address the problems they face on the job, rather than sort of pouring theory into their heads and then let them see, what works for me and how do I apply this. So I think that for me, that's the two biggest shifts. So the shift to much more coaching and the shift to virtual leadership development.
So you mean from moving from classroom-based leadership development classes, and when I think of leadership development, I think of management retreats, right? You sequester the management or potential candidates for development, and put them in a setting where they will be focusing on developing those skills, right?
Yes.
So since that may be not possible for a bit, how would the virtual version of that work? Have you been exploring those alternatives? How do they work in practice so far?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And to be honest, we are only embarking on that journey. But I have some ideas. So some of the experiments we are running at the moment is to use coaches to deliver what we call experiential action learning sets. So we bring 5 or 6 managers together. They have to bring a managerial issue that's dear to their heart. So something that they actually struggle with. And then we have an external coach take them through a 1.5 to 2 hour process where the 6 of them listen to each other's issue and provide support, but based on a framework delivered by the coach, and the conversations are facilitated by the coach. And that actually works very well, very well. And it's something similar we want to do for the P5s and the D1s in UNHCR. So the virtual leadership development program would actually look at like three webinars with a bit of content. So not long webinars, maybe an hour max, with a little bit of content followed by conversations. And then 3 of these action learning sets where they will break out in small groups. Each group will be facilitated, so groups of 3. They will each bring an issue to the table, and then they will have a facilitated conversation. And then some reflection about, so what did we actually learn from the process and from each other, as a way of helping them to bring that back to their own practice. So, you know, we address actual problems, and then they get a process that they can also bring back. And the last component, so 3 webinars, 3 experiential action learning sets, and then 3 coaching hours. So they, as part of the process, they will come up with an action plan, and the coaching will actually help them implement the action plan. So that's the plan, and then it will run over 4 months. So there will be, you know, sessions almost on a weekly basis, but not in the traditional way of, you know, you pull out people, you fly them into a location, you have them for 1 week, you know, you go through exercises, theory, conversations, which I think is also worthwhile and good, but it's simply not possible. And at the moment, I mean, for us, it's not possible probably for the next, at least another 12 months. I mean, I don't see face-to-face trainings taking place. Because UNHCR is a global organization, and because COVID is playing out differently in different countries and on different continents, it's probably not going to be possible to do any face-to-face training in the traditional sense in the next 12 months, at least.
Which is a pity, because we know that there are some things that are irreplaceable. As much as we can get online, and there are excellent things and benefits of being online and delivering programs online, of course, you know that better than anyone. But it is, I think, important to be able to have that informality that sometimes happens in real life settings, right? And networking opportunities are different too. I think it hopefully we'll be able to move to the hybrid form fast. But I know you're doing also leadership on the leadership of development of innovation labs within the UN Refugees Agency, which are crucial for for delivering services, humanitarian services on the ground. So can you tell us a bit about that experience? What happened there in the lab? Because it's an active also part of development in terms of delivery of services and staff development in the United Nations offices of the United Nations Refugee Agency here in Geneva.
So, I mean, I'm not directly involved in the innovation lab. I mean, and in a way that's not quite true, because I'm part of. I mean, I have a staff sitting in Budapest who is responsible for the innovation fellowship program, which is part of what the innovation lab is doing. And with the lab, I mean, or with the innovation service, we've been working on actually developing leadership, I mean, innovation training for leaders. So we've been running what I would call an experiment as a sort of collaborative experiment with ILO, with UNOC, with ITU, and then UNHCR, and with the University of Geneva, where we've had a group of 24 senior leaders together from across the organizations for a 2-day face-to-face event, and trying to benefit very much from the innovation ecosystem in Geneva. So actually going out and visiting some of the organizations that do interesting stuff around innovation. And then also talking a lot about, the role of the senior manager in terms of innovation, not as an innovator. I mean, not me as an innovator, as a senior manager, but my role as a senior manager and my role in terms of creating an enabling environment for others to actually drive innovation. So that was the broader theme. We should have had a follow-up day, which didn't happen because of COVID. So we are looking at ways of doing this online instead. But I think it's it's a space which is really ripe for development. I mean, in terms of how do you help senior managers understand the importance of innovation? I think for the sake of innovation, but also for the sake of good management. I think there is a lot of good management principles buried in the innovation mindset in a way. So the idea, I mean, ideas around experimentation, ideas around learning. I mean, for me, that's the way to move forward. And that's why I think innovation and the innovation toolkit is such an inspirational toolkit for, I mean, not only for innovators, but for managers in general.
And I understand some applications have come out of that, right? And you have also developed applications to deliver services, or have partnered or fostered using applications. There are so many.
That's part of what the innovation service is doing. But as part of this training, we haven't had any tangibles come out yet. I mean, it's more. I mean, in a way, it's more plans for what do individual participants take back to their organizations, and what do they commit to doing in terms of creating an enabling environment, which hopefully will lead to applications.
Oh, I see. You are collaborating with other technology companies, or trying to develop products, actually, but it's more the mindset that you take it to the organization and the way you operate.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we've realized in UNHCR, and it's interesting. I mean, it's so when we do development, leadership and management development for the P4s, for example, one of the things that we see, we take them through an assessment process. And one of the things we see is that the innovation competence is by far the weakest of the 7 competencies that they are assessed against. And it's something similar for the P5s and for the D1. So we are not strong on the actual, support to innovation. Then when we get feedback from these innovation fellows, of which we have 25 every year, and they always say the biggest obstacle is actually the management's understanding of innovation. So it's not that we want managers to get involved in innovation, we simply want managers to give us the space and understand why I cannot guarantee that my prototype will actually deliver what you expect it to deliver tomorrow, because I'm in a process of innovating and refining. So that understanding needs to come through, which is why I think it's an interesting area to work with.
What are the 7 aspects you mentioned when you look into areas of development that need work in terms of development? You mentioned 7.
Yeah, we look at 7.
Because our listeners are not completely aware of everything that's happening, so we want to sort of introduce them to this world.
So now you're catching me out here, because I can't remember all 7 competencies. But I mean, one is collaboration / co-creation. One is clearly innovation. There is competencies around team building, team management. There is a competency around self-awareness. And then there is another 2 competencies that I can't remember. But it's competencies aligned to the UN leadership framework. So that's where we've drawn inspiration from.
Oh yes, I've seen there is a publication even, I think the last year was published, right? The UN leadership skills. There's a book.
Yes, yeah. So, and the Hammarskjöld Foundation, that may be the one that you're referencing.
Right. Yeah, that's the one. Which is a good reference for everyone working and looking to develop their skills and their leadership and management skills. So tell us a bit about your career, because you worked for the United Nations, for the United Nations Development Program. Then you took a break and worked for the private sector for a few years. You came back to work for the United Nations Refugee Agency. What has been your experience on being able to, navigate the private sector as well as the UN and the public sector in general? What are the main takeaways? How they inform each other?
I think the biggest, not the biggest, but I think some of the advantages. I mean, I think it's a huge advantage to have been out of the UN system. Just realizing there is a world outside. There are other ways of doing things. I think that in itself adds value to, you know, what I do in the UN. I think the private sector has more of a sort of I can do attitude, which I appreciate. I was working as a consultant for a number of years, and I think that in a way the client orientation perspective that you have to have as a consultant is also a valuable perspective to bring to the UN. So it's not only about my section and what we do, but I mean I need to understand what we do and how that links to what others are doing around me in order for me to add value. So I think the perspectives are complementary, and I couldn't be where I am today without having done years with the private sector as well. I think it's valuable, and I think it's important for us, I think for UN organizations in general, to get others involved, to make sure we have also diversity in terms of where we get people from, so we don't have people who are only grown up within the UN. But I think it should almost be mandatory to move out, and then if you want to move back in, that's fine, which is what I realized. So after 10 years in consulting, I realized, we haven't talked about anything but profit for the last 5 years. I need to get back into conversations that are also, about professionalism, about quality, and about other issues than profit, which is why I applied, and I was lucky and fortunate enough to get back in with UNHCR.
And so what's next for UNHCR? Because you are going to be extremely busy with the fallout of the crisis in regions of conflict. The Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for a ceasefire. There are so many issues related to humanitarian work that you'll be overwhelmed. So how do you see that playing out now in terms of the leadership development within the UN Agency for Refugees?
There is no doubt that I think a lot of our colleagues, and in particular colleagues who are in the field, are under tremendous pressure. The pressure in terms of continuing to provide services to refugees, continuing to interact with and work with refugees. And then on top of that, pressure in terms of, personal anxiety and personal considerations. What happens if I get sick? A lot of colleagues are stuck in places where you can't be medically evacuated, or it's very difficult to become, to be medevac. So that adds to the pressure. When people are not getting their rest and recuperation, so people are working throughout. So it's a bit of a. It's not a pressure cooker, but people are under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. And so what we've tried to do. We're trying a whole range of different things within UNHCR. Unfortunately, we have a very strong medical and staff welfare section that provides ongoing support in terms of medical issues, but also in terms of psychosocial issues. And I think that's really, really important. So they are there to to take calls, to provide support, and to coach people through depression and crisis and grief and loss. So that's going on. In terms of leadership, what we've tried to do is we've been running some webinars across, globally for UNHCR, trying to frame some of the issues that people are facing in the context of COVID, but also saying, some of the things that you struggle with now may also have been issues you struggled with before. So you need to do even more in terms of reaching out. You need to do even more in terms of talking to staff. You need to understand where staff are coming from. What are the kinds of concerns and issues? If you have colleagues who work from home with kids who cannot go to school, you can't expect them to deliver 110%. So you need to know, you need to show flexibility. So some of the fundamentals in terms of people management, is really what we've been reiterating and trying to help just, by framing it in the context of COVID. So this is what we would urge you to do in the context of COVID. Make sure you make boundaries between work life and private life, even though it's difficult and everything sort of tends to get blurred. Don't expect people to, have meetings before 8 in the morning and after 6 in the evening. You as the manager need to help them set the boundaries so that there is some sense of normalcy in this context. So that's what we've tried to do. I think going forward, clearly the whole issue around people management, it's going to be big for us. It's about, fundamentally, I think it's about shifting the power, enabling managers and staff to take more responsibility of their own career, having better performance management conversations, making performance management regular, and part of the ongoing dialogue you have with your manager. And making that culture shift is going to be big, and I think that's one of the things. And then, of course, a lot more teleworking or working remotely. No one can say that it doesn't work now. So I'm sure that will happen.
Absolutely, it works too well sometimes. Actually, it is great. I think there are so many benefits. But one last thing I would like to speak about is regarding performance reviews. Do you have the 360 performance review type of thing at the United Nations Refugees Agency? Because I don't know if the UN Secretariat has the same, where the employees also rate their managers, which I heard that there are very good things to it, but of course all systems can be rigged, but that usually that the 360 works better in terms of creating synergies in the team. That weren't
so what we do is that we have 360s. We have 360s for D1s, P5s, P4s, P3s. They are not mandatory, except that they are included in some of the leadership development programs. So several of the programs actually start with a 360, where the manager gets feedback from the team, and that 360 becomes part of a conversation with a coach and moves into a development plan. So what are my career aspirations as wherever I am, and how do I use the feedback from the 360 to set a course in terms of where do I want to go, and how do I then make sure I either get the experience and or the training that I need to that is needed to bring me to where I go. So we see the value, and staff see the value a lot of the 360s, but it's not part of our formal performance management system. That's more the traditional manager and supervisee.
I see.
Even though we also just to say that we are also looking at revamping the performance management as part of this whole people management.
Oh, that's excellent. And one last one, it's really regarding women in the workplace, as we've been talking about, and it seems like it's almost like a broken record, but it is a situation that hasn't changed just because we spoke about it at the Beijing conference, right? Many years ago. But we continue, striving to make sure that the workplaces are inclusive. And so to wrap it up, what are the challenges in terms of leadership development for women? What are the barriers that you encounter within the organization, and what are the aspirations that you have running this leadership program for the United Nations Refugee Agency in terms of advancing women in the workplace?
We do. I think we do lots of very good stuff in UNHCR to advance women. I think we are pretty close to parity across. Across all grades except for at the D1 level, if I recall. We have dedicated. We're part of a collaborative program for younger P3 women, which runs across the Geneva UN community. We have a special program for senior women leaders, where we bring senior women leaders together for 2 days, and now we will do it virtually. We used to bring them together in Geneva. We will now do it virtually, but that's fundamentally to build networks and strengthen the community of women, and also make them aware of their role in promoting other women. I think there is so much you can do in terms of learning. I think the fundamental issue is probably more around systemic barriers to the advancement of women. So I think at some point, I think it could be interesting to look at having, trying to blind applications, trying to also have different kinds of interviews that may bring out some of the skills that women have and some of the experiences that they have and that they bring to management, that is more featured more heavily and more prominently in the interview process. But I think overall we are actually not doing bad. And also in terms of, I'm aware that when we do shortlisting, for example, you need to shortlist, I think it's 2 women for every man. So there is a lot being done to support women, which is, I think, a good thing.